mean, that's like a whole year of work.
Greetings, hello, one and all.
As you say, like what I wear, my friends looking at you, like your hair, the way you're doing your reels, the way you're speaking to people, regular outreach.
A phone call
I just won't be able to do that. Yeah.
Well, like I say, it's your first real venture within this field, so it's a learning process. And
hello, excuse me.
At the end of the event,
you're in a live Zoom call.
Have learned triple what you would imagine, and moving forward to next year, you're going to be in a wonderful place.
Jevon, you're muted.
I'll unmute myself. I was muting background sound we had a minute ago and muted myself in the process. Hello, everybody.
How about, should we start the recording again? Is that possible? That's an interesting.
Well, the session is being recorded. We'll make what we can of that. So once again, we'll do a restart nevertheless. Hello, one and all. Welcome to this evening's session, this evening here in my neck of the woods. I'm in Switzerland. My name is Jevon Dangley. I'm the Transpersonal Coaching Psychology course leader at Alef Trust. We're coming together this evening to explore organizations as living systems at the edge of chaos. And this evening's session will be led by Robin de Carteret. So we welcome Robin, and I'll be introducing him a little bit later on. As we traditionally do, though, before we get started, I'm going to offer us a few words of guidance to land together, to ground ourselves and prepare ourselves for this evening session. Before I get to any of that, in case you missed the announcement, you're to have a few things with you today. 2 would suffice. A piece of A3 paper, a sheet of newspaper would do, and some rubber bands or some sticky tape. If you haven't organized that yet, then if you've got it available, now would be an opportunity to dash off and make sure you've got that with you, because Robin will be guiding us through a game to use these materials a little later on. Okay, so let's just take a few moments to make sure we are really here in our own physical spaces. I tend to look around and make sure there's a ceiling above my head, walls around, and a solid floor below my feet. You can look around your own space, even if you're catching the recording later on, and make sure you're really there. And make sure you're appropriately dressed for today's session. Appropriately dressed would be that you're comfortable in what you're wearing. So just check in with your temperature, the temperature of your body right now. I hope you're not too warm or too cold, wherever you find yourself. So we're just going to do a temperature gauge. What's your temperature right now? Are you appropriately dressed? How do the clothes feel that make contact with your skin right now? So let's get in touch with temperature as you feel it on the surface of your skin. And if you are wearing any clothes, let's just get a sense of all those points of contact where your clothing connects with the surface of your skin. And while you're at it, bring awareness to all the points of contact that your body makes with the surface that holds you at this time. That surface may be the chair where you are seated, the contact of your feet on the ground. Let's bring awareness to these contact points. And allow yourself to be held by gravity and cradled by the earth, which holds us all. And as we're checking in, let's check our internal climate. What's the weather like inside you right now? And the weather can be determined by your mental state, emotions, any sensations that you become aware of in the body. What might all of that show up as if you named it as a weather condition? And you'd be welcome to share the weather within you once you've connected with that in the chat window. What's it like? Is it cloudy, windy, sunny, clear? Is the weather fluctuating or is it stable? So as you sense into your internal climate, let's move awareness to the gentle in and out flowing breeze of your breath. Bringing awareness to the breath now. And maybe it's necessary for you to adjust your posture so that you can feel the fullness of breaths all the way in and all the way out. Maybe it's necessary for you to adjust the way you're sitting so that the breath may flow freely. And it might be interesting as you tune into the rhythm of your breath as a gentle breeze that comes and goes. You might notice how your own inner weather changes, maybe stabilizes a little, calming, soothing, flowing with the breath. And then when you're ready, taking a firmer breath in and out. If your eyes were closed, you might allow them to open so we can look around the room and just make sure we are here and intentionally connect with each other across this Zoom space, including those watching the recording later on. May you too feel present in this atmosphere that we're co-creating here today as we explore organizations as living systems at the edge of chaos. And founder of Systems Games, Robin de Carteret, is an educator, facilitator, and consultant in complexity science and sustainability, with a knack for bringing his scientific knowledge to groups in innovative and fresh ways. Using simulation activities and experiential techniques from performance improvisation, he introduces thought-provoking concepts from complexity science, biomimicry, and systems thinking. His work centers around shifting perspectives from a linear and mechanistic lens to recognizing the world as a highly interconnected network of living systems. Robin has a BSc in physics and an MSc in holistic science from Schumacher College, and he has led workshops in systems thinking for organizations, universities, conferences, and events both nationally in the UK and internationally over the past 17 years. Thank you, Robin, for coming to share your knowledge and experience with us today. Over to you.
Thank you, and really nice to see everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. So just give me a thumbs up if that's working. You can see the title screen. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so just to very briefly introduce myself. So I'm Robin de Carteret, as Jevon said. I am the founder of Systems Games, and I basically use interactive group games to help people explore how complex living systems work. And today, or this evening, we're going to be I'm going to sort of take you on a journey through looking at the world as a complex living system. And we're going to be investigating and playing with dynamics like interdependence, feedback, emergence, self-organization, this beautiful idea of living at the edge of chaos, dealing with uncertainty. And we'll do a few experiential games as we go through, because I found that systems thinking often is quite hard to get our head around, but if we can sort of embody it and we recognize a lot of the patterns that we actually see in our daily lives, because we're basically dealing with complex systems all the time, even if we don't know, even if we're not using that language and we're not specifically taught about that. So that's what I love about systems thinking, is the insights that we can get from systems thinking apply across nearly everything that we do. So how we're working in teams, how we're working in organizations, creating social change, whether that's within your organization or within wider culture. It also applies to ecosystems and the whole global climate system and biodiversity system, the economic system. And so even though it's quite complex, all of these ideas, we actually have this amazing source of wisdom to draw on. And as Janine Benyus says, we've got nature's 3.8 billion year research and development program that has been going on, basically dealing with nearly any problem or challenge that we could ever come across. And so if we just understand and study and look at nature and the way nature works, we are finding that we're finding solutions to problems, you know, things like how to make a material that can harvest energy from the sun, or materials that can self-clean themselves in the rain, but also things like processes, like making use of waste products in a sort of cyclical circular economy sort of design, but also in organizational design. So how we could actually operate together to create resilience, especially in this kind of increasingly unpredictable world that we're living in. So I just wanted to start with something that I find pretty inspiring. So this is another organization, but it's not an organization made up of humans. It's made up of another creature. So see if you can have a guess. Can you see, just to check, you can see an image of a sort of some soil, basically. Noticing another ant is digging and digging there, creating a kind of reinforcing feedback loop that continues, makes the tunnel bigger, or whether it's following pheromones and laying down pheromone trails, and those interactions creating these increasingly complex designs that we see in the sort of final ant's nest. So I think it's really interesting. Obviously, we don't want to be sort of naive and go, okay, so how are we going to just apply that directly to a human organization? But I think that especially in times when we're noticing and finding that human organizations are not actually doing too well, or struggling with uncertainty, or struggling with chaos that's going on in the world, not being able to adapt quickly enough, or having people in the organization who are feeling very demoralized, or feeling like they haven't got any purpose in what they're doing. I think we can actually really learn a lot from these living systems, because these ants are basically, the way that they do it is within the context of what they're finding. So it's actually completely adaptable. So if they come across a big stone, they're going to just go around that in a way that, because they're following the context of the environment that's around them. So what's relevant about a living systems approach to organization? So to me, there's two key things. One is that at the moment, we are in a polycrisis. We've got this ecological, economic, and social crises going on. And the actions of organizations are a big contributor to that, basically, because that is basically how we organize ourselves. So if we're wanting to create a life-sustaining future, then organizations are going to have to adapt how they're behaving, because at the moment it's totally untenable. You know, we're basically heading for a sort of collective suicide at the moment, via climate change and biodiversity loss, you know, amongst other things. So to me, that's a key thing, and that if we look to nature, there are entities and organizations and ecosystems that have survived for 3.8 billion years. So they know how to survive. They know how to deal with situations. In fact, every single living being that is currently alive has survived every single generation since the first life. I think that's quite an amazing thing to think of. So nature is an absolute expert at surviving changing circumstances, and so there's things we can definitely learn from it or her or them, however you want to say that. The other thing, obviously, is that organizations are themselves complex systems, and they are not well managed by a linear mechanistic way of thinking. So I think it can also really help in the way that we organize ourselves in organizations. So there's lots of solutions that I think are coming from living systems. We've got material implications and social implications. So almost obvious in a sense once you start looking at it. If we look at how living systems work, it would suggest that the linear economy approach that we've been taking for the last 200 or 300 years isn't working very well. You know, this idea of taking, extracting, using, and then dumping materials is basically creating problems at both ends, where we extract it and also where we're dumping it into either the atmosphere or into land or waters. And so if we look at nature, it's always in cycles, in circles. So there's always some use for whatever waste product so that they can continue round in a loop forever. And so we can either do that through reuse or recycling, or this is from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I find it an incredibly clear way of putting it. There's just two cycles, either the technical nutrients, where we're recycling and reusing things in the sort of human realm, or we can make use of the natural biological process of biodegradability and then renewability of like growing things back from the soil. So if we just use those two loops, then that gives us the possibility of having organizations that will be able to be sustainable into the future, genuinely sustainable. And social implications, and obviously we're going to look more into this as we start doing the games, but I just think this is a nice framework to have in your mind, that Fritjof Capra talks about dual nature of organizations. And he's basically saying that all organizations are living systems, complex living systems, no matter how they're structured, even if they're incredibly hierarchical, incredibly linear, they still have humans in them who are having relationships with other humans, and therefore there is a living element to them. And so he talks about these design structures, which are the kind of things that we might think of and might see when we think about how an organization is organized, like policies and procedures and line management. And that's really important because it gives clarity, it gives stability, but also at the same time, there's always these emergent structures, which are the humans, the people talking to each other, having conversations, the gossip that's going on, the kind of actual power dynamics that are going on, the way that information spreads through just people talking to each other rather than over the official channels. So that's all going on all the time. And so what I want to do today is to kind of go into and investigate some of the dynamics that go on in those emergent structures so that we can get more savvy to them. Because if we want to create organizations that are more flexible, more adaptable, more innovative, more able to deal with uncertainty, we basically can just make use of these emergent structures that are already there. And I think that's what's such a nice way that I think Peter Senge talks about this too as well. And rather than coming in and saying, right, we're going to completely restructure, we're going to completely change this organization to make it more like a living system. You're basically just needing to go in and recognize it already is a living system, and to value and promote and give more power to the dynamics that are going on, the emergent dynamics that are going on, and gradually kind of almost increase the aliveness of the organization, rather than trying to do a kind of top-down restructuring, which is often what I think people think of when they're thinking of changing organizations. So we're going to do our first little activity here. So I'm going to just stop sharing so I can see everybody. So if you can turn your screen or your camera on just for a few minutes while we're doing this, that'd be great. And what I want to do here is, so with complex systems, they're very obviously complex, and one way to try and understand them, so often we're trying to understand how complex systems work, and one way to do that is to split them up into separate parts, and that's what we call reductionism, and we often use that in the kind of Western way of trying to understand things. And it's actually really useful, it's really powerful, it's really useful, but the problem with it is that it only tells you a certain amount. It doesn't tell you about the relationships between the parts of the system. And in complex systems, often the relationships between the parts of the system are actually more important than what is the individual parts of themselves are doing. So what I'm interested in the workshops that I do, and obviously I do a lot of these I do in person, so there's more opportunity for sort of interactive games. But we can do some that work online, where we are effectively creating mini sets of relationships, so creating a kind of network of relationships, and then we're seeing what feedback loops happen, if there's any emergent properties that come out. And so I like to think of this as creating a mini whole system. So we're not splitting the system up, but creating a sort of mini but whole system that is small enough to get our heads around. And then once we can understand the dynamics that are going on in there, we can combine that with what we learned from the reductionist way, and then you get a better and more accurate sense of what is actually going on in the whole system itself. So what we're going to do is I want you to, so when I say go, so not yet, I want us to all basically clap, but with our hands visible in our screens, kind of like this. And we're going to do a sort of round of applause kind of clapping. So it's kind of random clapping. Now, actually, it's a bit weird with Zoom because it doesn't tend to give us all of the sound. I think it kind of filters it for who it thinks is most likely to be needing to be heard. But if you're willing to, just turn off your mute so we can actually hear your clapping. So turn your mutes off and put your cameras on if you can. And what I want you to do is randomly clap. And then when I put my finger up in the air like this, I want you to choose one other person on your screen, and then just clap in time with them. So just try and synchronize with that one person that you're clapping. And when we randomly do that, we'll probably make a network of connections of people following each other. So let's just see what happens. It's a bit of an experiment. Okay, you ready? So start randomly clapping. It's so weird because you can hardly hear anything. And then now follow one other person and clap in time with them. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to let this go a little bit longer because at the moment I can't see any pattern. It still kind of looks like you're randomly clapping. I don't know if any of you feel like you are synchronized. So I'm going to now just give you the opportunity to see if we can, as a group, clap together in synchrony, however you want to do it. See if we can get everybody clapping together at the same time. I'm going to join in as well. So I'm basically seeing that we're not managing to do that, to reach this goal of clapping together, I think. Okay. So that is, you can mute yourself again now if you want. Oh no, actually, well, yeah, you can, but you can come, if you want to make a comment, you can obviously unmute. So first of all, sorry, because it's a bit of a frustrating game on Zoom. And I'll explain in a minute why, but tell me what happened. Like, what did you see happening? What was the experience like? Did you notice anything that is meaningful? Just unmute and say if you can, if you want. Yeah, blame. Oh yeah, there you go. In the chat, maybe it's Zoom delays. You got it in one. Blame technology.
I actually felt I was in sync with the person I was following.
Yes.
But I was quite focused on that one person, so I didn't have much of a peripheral sense.
Okay, good. Yeah. So in a way, you did actually achieve what I had asked you to do, which was
But
to
only
clap in
on
sync.
the
Yes.
very focused in way.
Just with that one person. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Anyone else before I say more about it?
Yes.
Felt like I was. Oh, sorry, Wendy.
Okay, go on, Wendy first.
Thank you. I can also agree with Karen. I think I focused on the person I selected and I tried to keep up with his clapping. And at some stage, I felt as if his clapping was also in sync with my rhythm.
Yeah.
So I think we have achieved something. And I was wondering if he realized that I was actually following his clapping rhythm.
Oh yeah. Who was it you were following? Okay, and who was it? Sorry, who else? Someone else was saying something just then.
Yeah, it's me. Sorry, it's probably quite hard to follow me because I've got this dodgy camera at the moment. But yeah, I felt like it went into sync, and it sort of, there was a period, and then it phased away, and then it phased back in again. But also because I was really focused on one person, but I wasn't sure if that person was following me or not. I was hesitant. I was sort of waiting for claps and preempting, but we were coming in and out of phase, basically. Yeah. So I felt like there were times of synchrony.
Okay. So in the chat, someone's saying they're really curious as how it works in person. So when it's live. So it's completely different. So when you do this live, it synchronizes quite quickly. And in a way, what I use it as a way of talking about how, just even where one person, a bit like the ants are following another ant's pheromone trail, you might be just following one other person, but it then creates this emergent group coherence that happens. But in this situation, as someone else noticed, the delay, it's not actually that long a delay, but it's maybe half a second, maybe, I don't know, maybe a second of delay that we get in the process of it being transmitted to the other computer. That's enough to basically completely change how it works. And it's actually quite a good sort of learning point there, because let me just show you, if I just share my screen again. So can you see the hands clapping on the screen? So just watch this video of a caravan. Can you see the video of the caravan? And what's happening here is an example of what happens when you have delay in a system. So that car driver, terrifying thing to happen. The caravan slightly maybe started wobbling, and the car driver then turns to adjust because of that wobbling. But because there's a delay in the sort of time that it takes for the car to turn and then to adjust how the caravan is moving, by the time it gets there, it actually makes the caravan turn more instead of less. And then the car driver does the same thing and tries to turn the other way. And makes it swing the other way. And so you get this kind of effectively like a kind of reinforcing feedback loop, which gets worse and worse. So instead of the driver balancing out the effect, because of that small delay, they actually make it worse and worse. And so this is what Donella Meadows says. One of the reasons she says that one of the highest leverage points that we can make a difference in a system is actually to change the delays. So it's really and often if you're not thinking of your organization or whatever you're dealing with as a complex system, you might not think about the delays, but often in organizations, they can really have a big effect. So it might be, for example, if you're ordering stock and your delays are too long, you might get a small blip, and that then means that you overstock and you end up with way too much stock the next time, because the order of that over buying doesn't come for a certain amount of time. There's this really interesting game that you can play, which we don't have time to do today, called the beer game, where people are sort of given this scenario where they need to order beer as a retailer from a wholesaler, and the wholesaler needs to order it from the brewery. And what can happen is you get these massive oscillations in overbuying and then completely not having any stock at the wrong times because of those delays in the system. And if you just shorten the delays, then it can sort out the problem. Equally, I know that in financial trading, one of the problems is too little delays. And so they have these ridiculously fast trading going on, literally microseconds between trades. And that then actually creates more instability in the financial markets. And so if you had a bit more of a delay in there, it would buffer those ups and downs and stop them amplifying themselves. So just being aware of delays and what the appropriate amount of delay would be for your system is really helpful. And we'll look at feedback loops. Those are kind of the three key, almost like building blocks of systems dynamics, is the feedback loops and the delays between the feedback loops. But I just wanted to almost take a step back. Like I said, I suppose one of my sort of purpose, I suppose, the reason I'm doing this is because I think we are in trouble, as a planet, as a species, not just as a species, but as a planet. We seem to be experiencing these multiple ecological, economic, and social crises. They seem to be coming pretty thick and fast at the moment. Things like the rise of populism, the climate crisis, the rise of antibiotic resistance, pandemics, got sort of rising stress and mental health epidemics going on. And to me, from a sort of systems point of view, they are all connected. They are all actually symptoms of something deeper. So one way to look at it is that we have this increasingly complex world. It's now basically globalized. So we used to be regional or community based, so small scale, and we've now got to the point where we're basically a single large global culture. It's also highly connected, highly networked, and the network's connections are actually increasing in speed. So we're having faster broadband, faster flights, faster mobile phone connections. And all of those things actually increase complexity. So all of those things lead to increased complexity in a system. And the problem is that our mindset, I would say, hasn't really kept pace with this change, hasn't really increased in its complexity. It's still basically based on a linear and mechanistic way of thinking. A causes B, without really noticing that B also causes or influences A, and also C and D and E and F. So I kind of feel like just the way that we're thinking in all fields, in politics, in the media, in the way we run organizations, a lot of people, most people, it's just kind of unfit for purpose now. And it's creating this societal behavior that I would say is kind of represented by this image. I don't know if anyone would like to just unmute and chip in and tell me what you see in this image. So I would say this is, I mean, it's kind of crazy. It's suicidal. It's maybe just very, very short-term thinking. And the other thing I kind of like about systems thinking is that it can make you quite compassionate in a sense, because you can just say, well, rather than saying this is an evil businessman or you know, an idiot, he's basically a person who's maybe just trying to get some wood for his family. Maybe they're cold at home, he just needs some wood, so he's just cutting some wood. And the culture he's grown up in hasn't allowed him to even make the connection that what he's sawing is what he's sitting on. And that to me is literally the position we're in. You know, and what's strange about it though is that we actually know what's going on. So we do know that we're sitting on this branch, and we do know that the saw that we're sawing with is going to make the branch fall, and yet we're still doing it. So all of us, including me, today have used carbon emissions, created carbon emissions, and we know that that is causing this damage, and yet we're still continuing. And it's a bit like the game where we're clapping and we're trying to synchronize, and we all want to synchronize, and I'm suggesting different ways we could synchronize, and yet we still aren't. We still can't. We're still not doing it. And there's something about the system, the way that we've designed the system, and in that case it was to do with the delay, means that we actually can't do what we're trying to do. This is incredibly frustrating and not a nice place for us to be in as humans who care about the world. And I think nearly everybody cares about the world, you know, even people who are voting for politicians who are actively campaigning against, for example, net zero policies. I still think those people care about the world. It's just that they've got a different way of seeing what they think is important or what the priority is at the moment. So to me, it's Einstein said we can't solve problems using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. And I think we basically need a shift in mindset. We need a diversity of mindsets. So what animal do you see here? You could put it in the chat. Just type in what the grey shadow animal is there. Okay. Okay, so we've got duck, duck, bunny and duck, rabbit, rabbit and duck, rabbit and duck, rabbit and duck, rabbit, rab duck. That's good. Okay, so some of you already know this, I'm sure, and some of you are seeing them as differently. We've got this diversity, and we've got looking at the same reality. We see different things. Similarly, the person making the shadow, do you see an old lady or a young woman? So you can see both. So to me, we need a shift in mindset. And I think there's lots of different mindsets. I think it's good to have a diversity of mindsets. But at the moment, we have a real domination of mindsets based in linear thinking, mechanistic thinking. And I think we need to shift towards mindsets that are based on seeing the whole, seeing how things are interconnected. So I want to just do a little activity here. So if you can just point your finger towards the ceiling and rotate your finger in a clockwise direction. I'm just going to see if I can see a few more of you here. Right. Okay, and now I want you to bring your finger down below your head, below your face, and then look down at it while still rotating it in the same direction. Tell me which way it's rotating now. So hopefully, if you've done it as I'm talking about, like you're doing it like a flat plate, you should be seeing it clockwise above your head. And then as you go down, you're looking down and actually it's going anti-clockwise. And I think I saw a sort of look of surprise on some people's faces then, which is nice to see. Because it is pretty amazing when you first do this. And I think this is a really lovely example of a shift in perspective or a shift in worldview, where we're literally looking at the world, the reality of the world, but we can then change our perspective on it, and it's literally, we can describe it in literally exactly the opposite way. And what's also interesting is that if I do it towards the camera and I say, well, I'm going clockwise, I think you'll be seeing it anti-clockwise. No, it's mirrored, so it's actually going clockwise. But anyway, if you were doing it in real life towards me, then we would disagree on what we're seeing, even though it's the same physical reality that's going on. And again, I think this is another key thing from systems thinking, is it makes you realize that there are different perspectives, there's different ways of seeing the world, and you kind of have to change, weirdly, you have to change your mindset to be able to recognize that you even have a mindset. And that's one of the challenges. So one more little activity. If you just fold your arms like this, just fold your arms, everybody. And then just notice what arm is on top, and then unfold your arms and then fold them the other way around. So you've got the other arm on top, the one that you're not used to. Now, just again, just unmute and tell me, or in the chat, whichever you want, tell me how that feels, having your arms like that, the other way around. Yeah, so very unnatural.
Unfamiliar.
Awkward, unfamiliar. Yeah. Someone says, I like it. Heavy, twisted, warm.
Uncomfortable.
Awkward. Yeah, surprising. Yeah. So lots of different ways of seeing it. But if we see that as almost like a metaphor for changing our mindset, I think that really kind of tallies with that idea of it's uncomfortable, it's awkward, it's surprising. Maybe you had to think about it. You have to sort of consciously think that this is what's happening. Whereas when I first said to fold your arms, it's just a natural, almost intuitive action. And so that's the thing with when we're trying to change mindsets. If we're wanting people to shift towards a mindset that could be really beneficial for the world, we have to also recognize that that is quite a challenging thing. It takes effort. It's uncomfortable to start with, and it's kind of a hurdle. There's like this hurdle to go over, and it might be that once you've gone over the hurdle, it really makes your life better. A bit like maybe doing exercise or eating a healthy diet. It's sort of hard to get going, but once you do it, you sort of like don't look back and you say, I can't believe I never used to, I never did that before. It took me so long to do that or whatever. Yeah, Dan, do you have a question?
Yeah, no, just a reflection really.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just I think, this idea of mindset, and I think, I really agree with everything you're saying, but I'm also conscious that the more connected we are in a system, or the more connected systems are, the more perturbation in the system, the more uncertainty in the system. And when you're a human being living in an increasingly uncertain world, I think a lot of what you experience is obviously a feeling. And the feeling is, for many people, but not for all, might have a kind of cultural context. For many people, the uncertainty of the world is a place of anxiety. They're losing control. And I think there's a very physical response to that. So when we feel anxious, actually our cognitive ability to hold complexity, to see and work with complexity is reduced. We become, the mind naturally and physically, we become more efficient. Essentially, we become more focused on quick decisions and, as you say, linear thinking. And so there's a real feeling element to all of this. We can have this idea of wanting to shift our mindset, but actually the feeling of uncertainty and anxiety means that naturally and biologically we're kind of also becoming less able to shift that perspective and more entrenched in a pattern-based approach. Yeah, so it's interesting, just that kind of, just to recognize how obviously learning that practice and thinking from that perspective, mindsets is important. And then there's also this stuff around all those feelings, how we work with feelings, how we experience uncertainty. And obviously some cultures are very different. They don't experience uncertainty in quite such a anxiety inducing way as well. So I think that's just a thought.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Two things that come to me there is like that's a reinforcing feedback loop, isn't it? Where you've got a culture that effectively creates anxiety that makes the people unable to shift their mindset to make the culture more healthy. So it's a kind of, it's a sort of a bad reinforcing feedback loop, and therefore even harder for us to sort of break that cycle. But again, I think being aware of that, being a feedback loop, can help. And then, I really agree about the sort of the feelings aspect of it, and that maybe that's one of the interventions, isn't it? Like having parenting and schooling which allows children to express their feelings rather than learn to repress them might be one of the things that kind of opens the ability of people to have that mindset shift. And actually, I actually feel hopeful at the moment about that, in the sense that I think young people today are way, way more emotionally literate and kind of thoughtful and broad thinking than I think generations ago were. And I don't know whether that's a combination possibly of a bit more of that kind of emotional literacy in parenting and teachers, but also I think it is interestingly to do with social media as well, having kind of access to that information, even though it can also cause problems. Yeah. So yeah, we'll get to looking at feedback specifically, because I think that's a really key part of it, and obviously often is in the mix when you're finding that you're wanting to do something but can't do it. But yeah, just to kind of finish this little piece, like why are we not thinking in a systemic way if we're surrounded by complex living systems? If our family, our organization, our economic system, the ecosystems are all complex systems, why on earth are we not thinking and taught that in school, at universities? Why are politicians and the media not using systems language? And I think it's just because we have this quite weird Western worldview that is very unusual, I think, in the history of humanity and cultures. And it's based on this certain set of assumptions, and it just happens to have meant that it's been incredibly successful at creating technology and dominating the earth. And so it's taken over the globe, but it isn't necessarily a good way of doing things. It's just very successful in a certain narrow way at creating technology and kind of domination structures, I suppose. And like I said, most systems we work with are complex systems, and we need a different approach, because complex systems aren't actually controllable. So even though we're acting as if they're controllable and we try to control them, when we try to control them, we actually sort of restrict them. So we restrict this aliveness, and also I think we restrict people's humanity, compassion, and care. So you can have a group of caring, lovely human beings working together in an organization that is basically doing evil things, and I think that is happening all around the world. And I think we need to check what's going on and work out how to make that better. Yeah. Because I think when we try and control a complex system, which is not inherently not controllable, we then cause these unintended problems that we don't know about if we're thinking in a linear way. And so coming back to all of this polycrisis, I actually think that that's why we've caused these multiple crises, is because we're causing these, they're unintended, we're obviously not trying to do them, but they wouldn't have happened if we'd continued thinking in a more systems mindset that I think most indigenous cultures, previous cultures had before this kind of Western linear thinking mindset came along. So my brilliant tutor, Brian Goodwin, who was a tutor for me at Schumacher College, he talked about his mantra was basically moving from control to participation. And I just think this is such a good way of thinking about it. So, for example, moving from controlling agricultural fields by killing everything in there other than the plant you want to grow with pesticides, to understanding the soil and the relationships between the soil and the pests and the other creatures. From centralized energy production to community-based local energy. From controlling our symptoms using drugs to participating in a sort of healthy lifestyle. Obviously, I'm not saying we shouldn't do some of these control things. So, for example, drugs is a great example. They are incredibly important, incredibly useful. I'm very, very grateful for them in many different ways. And yet they want to be not the first point of call. You want to be obviously participating with your health first. And then if you can't solve it using that, then drugs can be a great way of sort of backing you up, I suppose. From controlling floods by controlling rivers to understanding living systems and letting the beavers do the work. So my brother-in-law's just introduced beavers to his land, and now it's just created this incredible wetland area, which now effectively is this amazing flood protection system for the people who live downstream, because if there's a big storm, the water builds up in those pools and then takes a number of days to be released, and so it slows down that flow. And so almost exactly the opposite mindset is much, much more successful than what the humans who were straightening rivers to try and let the floodwater go straight out to sea did. And by doing that, they basically created a lot of flooding for towns and villages on the way down towards the sea. And in organizations, rather than trying to create change through strict instructions, it's offering guiding principles, impulses that will be meaningful to the people in the organization. So I love this idea that living systems can basically are looking at, or basically discerning what it is that they want to be disturbed by and how they are disturbed by it. And here, as humans, we're doing that too, even though we might not put it in that way. But we are affected by things that are meaningful to us. And if we're just told to do something that we don't particularly agree with, then we're not going to be, it's not going to create the change that you want. You might get this pushback, and it can be very, a lot of energy and time putting into trying to create that change. Whereas if you're actually responsive and listening to what's going on, you can create the sort of small interventions that will then push the system in the right way. And that seems to be the way that nature operates. It's very elegant in the way that it does that, just sort of nudges and pushes things rather than kind of like forcefully dominating or sort of imposing an idea or a way of doing something. And obviously hierarchy we can think of as a kind of controlling way of organizing to a more participatory way of working. Obviously there's difficulties with just pure consensus decision making. And I found this Reinventing Organizations book by Frederick Laloux really valuable in giving me an insight into how you can organize it's not just consensus, but it also isn't hierarchy. He talks about this, for example, the advice process, where any individual can start a project or do something as long as they have sought advice from two people in the organization, one who is an expert on that area and another who would be affected by what they did. And once they've sought that advice, they can go ahead and do it. So it kind of has this balance between allowing the sort of dynamic and idea drive that you get, but has some checks and balances. So it's not just a free for all. Because, well, you know, and this is the pushback. If we do let go of this control, doesn't it just mean chaos? So if we want order, do we not need centralized control systems? So I just want to show you this lovely example from nature. These are little amoeba, and they're just milling around eating their bacteria and food, and but when they get hungry, they send off a chemical signal, a bit like the ants. And if they receive this chemical signal, they'll move towards it. And what you should be able to see now is the emergent dynamic of that. You can even see the pulsing. Can you see that, of them sort of pulsing? And they basically do this aggregation process where they come together and form into a single superorganism that basically looks like a slug. So these are still separate single-celled amoeba, but they're now acting together so coherently that they start to look and behave like a single organism. And that's why it's called a superorganism. In the same way that an ant colony or a beehive acts as a superorganism or a single organism. And so this is them now moving along in this sort of slug-like form. And what's incredible about this is that it's intelligent in that it knows to go uphill. It knows when it's got to the top of a hill. And when it's got to the top of a hill, it then turns into this final stage, which is a kind of stalk with the fruiting body on the top. But it somehow has this intelligence, but it has no brain. It has no nervous system. It has no muscles. It's really just the relationships between the movement and the behavior of those individual cells, individual single-celled beings, that creates this movement. I just think that's really, really, you know, powerful to see that we don't have to have a centralized control system like a brain to have intelligent order and intelligent processes going on. And so you can imagine that we can have organizations, if you have the right rules of interaction, ways of behavior, that you can create this intelligence that is actually greater than the intelligence of the individuals in the organization. Whereas I think at the moment, generally, we would say that organizations themselves are less intelligent than a single human being, which is kind of strange because they're made up of multiple human beings. Okay, so again, if we were doing this live in a room, we would do this game as you would be representing these little arrows. And unfortunately, I can't work out a way to do this properly online. So what I've done is I've written a little computer program that mimics this game. And so I'll just describe what it is. So this miniature whole system has these little arrows like entities that are moving around. And they could represent different things in different complex systems. So if it was the climate system, it might represent sea temperature, ice cover, marine algae, and CO2, yeah, each different one, or the Amazon rainforest or something. If it was an organization, it might be communication, the turnover of staff, innovation, and trust. And each different part of those, each element influences some others in the organization. So you can see that there's these dynamics that are affected by some and affect others. So you get this kind of network effect. Now in this game and in this computer program, I've just got it so that all they're doing is following one simple rule, which is that one arrow is following two by moving to be equidistant from the two that it's following. So that purple one is just trying to be the same distance away from green and blue, whatever happens. And so if the green and blue move, then purple needs to move to get back into that equidistant space, right? And so this is the little computer program. And so we've got those arrows following each other. And when there's a small system of just three, it's very ordered. So it just goes straight to order. And in some ways you could say that was good, but in other ways you could say, well, it's actually too rigid because it has no ability to adapt. It's just very ordered. Now, if you've got four, it's also pretty ordered. So they then find a place where they're all equidistant from each other and then find this kind of stability point or dynamic equilibrium. Now, just introduce one more element to the system. And this is where we've now gone into what we would call chaos. So chaos is not, in this sort of systems jargon, is not complete randomness, but it is a very unpredictable state where you can't tell what's going to happen. So if you look at the lines of those little elements, they are now basically unpredictable. And then what I find really striking is that from a place of chaos, they've now found this ordered state. So order has emerged out of chaos. And you would think that if we then added, another 10, so we've now got 14 elements, 15 elements, you might think, okay, well, these guys are just going to be in chaos forever, right? Because as you increase the complexity, it just gets more chaotic. And so here they are. And remember, they all started in a perfect circle, and they're just randomly following each other. But look, they have found a state of order. So even when there's 15 points in the network, they've now found this state of order. And I think, to me, that's quite a profound thing, I think, for people who are involved in all sorts of things, but in an organization, for example, if you have this idea that once you go into chaos, you will never come out of it, which I think is the sort of general sense that we have in our culture. If you then experience this, that actually in complex systems, you go through a state of chaos, and then complex systems inherently have this emergent order that tends to arise. And so I think that can give you a type of confidence to allow your system to go into chaos, and that in that chaos is where we find adaptability and novelty and solutions to problems that no one has been able to solve yet. And if you're unwilling to, or not confident enough to let your system go through that chaos, you won't ever be able to explore that space of possibilities. And so I think that's probably the case with a lot of organizations, that because we don't have this sense that we get this emergent order coming out of complex living systems, that we're actually unable to find these solutions that might be the sort of by far the best solution to the problem. So to me, that's this idea of organizations at the edge of chaos is based on Stuart Kaufman's work about living systems placing themselves at the edge of chaos, and that they do this so that they're sort of ordered enough to be able to do the day-to-day activities, but they're also able to flip into the chaotic state when it's needed, when they come across an unexpected obstacle or unexpected challenge that they need some kind of novelty. So let's just go back to this model, and just to kind of give it a very specific example, let's say that this is the climate system, because the climate system is also a complex system at the edge of chaos. And the climate system actually has a stability point that we have been in for since the last ice age. We've been in this kind of temperate, stable state. Okay, so let's say that this is representing the stable state. Now, what happens if we change one element in the system? So like carbon dioxide. So what I'm going to do here is move this little ball that represents carbon dioxide. And did you see what happened there? The whole system adjusted, and it actually balanced the system and kept it at that stability point. So as we've been emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, plants have been growing faster, the sea algae has been absorbing more and trapping it down under as limestone, and has been balancing it out. But if you push too far, what happens? So we then moved the CO2 even further as we, emitted more and more fossil fuels emissions. And this has now pushed the climate system into a truly chaotic state where it can't come back. So this is what we call a tipping point, where the system has now moved into a state where it won't go back to its previous state, even if we move the CO2 levels back to where they were. And to me, this is what's terrifying about a system's understanding of climate, is that most politicians think in a linear way and think that we'll be okay. If the weather starts getting too bad, we'll just, find some way of drawing the carbon back out of the atmosphere. But what scientists are telling us is that we are at the brink of multiple tipping points like this. And on the edge of going into that kind of chaotic realm where the climate system will be potentially uninhabitable for human civilization for thousands of years. It's not a thing that we can then take back to where it was. And yeah, I've been talking to people working on the tipping points report at Exeter, and it really is terrifying. And I actually think the narrative at the moment is that there's these people who are sort of over-egging and being doom-laden about climate. And actually, I'd say it's the other way around. I think that people are not understanding the seriousness of the situation we're in and the jeopardy that we're in right now as much as they are. So if you just literally read some of these scientific reports, go and have a look at the Exeter tipping points report. It's terrifying, but also it's positive, because what they're also saying, and what I'm saying, is that social change is also a complex system, and social change also has tipping points, and things can change culturally faster than we might imagine. And we've already gone past some tipping points. So with solar and wind and electric vehicles, I think we could probably say now we've gone past the tipping point where we now are going to have a green, electrical revolution. It's just that whether it's going to happen fast enough to cut emissions quick enough to stop these climate tipping points from happening. And that's the challenge we're in the next 5 years, is this kind of crazy race between trying to create social change fast enough to be able to effectively save ourselves from these climate tipping points. So another way to sort of visualize it is, we're pushing the Earth system to a point, and normally it will self-stabilize like this, but if you push it too far, it then rolls down into the next valley, and then no matter how hard you push back, it will still keep rolling down into that one. But equally, we can think of it as social change. If we can just get the sort of changes in society that we need to this point, then they will then just take care of themselves. And so again, I think understanding about how living systems work can really help us to identify what the conditions are needed to get the system up to the top. So this is talking about positive tipping points. And then what the things are that might then trigger that point. And then once we've done that, we've cracked it, and that happens over and over again in society, like the end of apartheid, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of slavery, even you could say Greta Thunberg and XR might have triggered a kind of global awareness of climate change and its urgency in the last sort of 5 years. And so we see these tipping points happening, suddenly changes. And yeah, that's my hope, is that we can trigger that. And I think organizations are going to be a big part of that. We need organizations to be part of that shift. So if we're thinking of organizations at the edge of chaos, how can we encourage that? How can we sort of see that the system is a living system, and how can we encourage and make use of that, the kind of positive aspect of the chaos bit? Because obviously chaos can be really damaging as well, if it's not held, if it's not managed in the right way. So one of the ways is to have a willingness of the organization to be disturbed. So a bit like I was saying before, if managers and teams are open to the idea that change and going into chaos for a period is actually okay, and that is a risk worth taking in finding a solution. We also need an active network with multiple feedback loops to amplify the triggering action, because if somebody comes up with this brilliant idea, but then no one else takes it up and it doesn't ripple out through the organization, then it kind of just dies on day one. And again, like I said, just this confidence to go through the chaos and create this space for emergence. And again, to me, it's a mindset shift, this idea of that kind of almost patience and trust that you need to allow a space for emergence, rather than taking control and designing and, you know, having a good idea and then making it happen, which is kind of what most of us think needs to happen if we want to do what we want to do. Okay, so these multiple feedback loops are a key aspect of how this stuff happens. So we're going to do our final activity now. So this is where you pull out your newspaper. And what I want you to do is, hopefully you've got a piece of newspaper like this or a piece of A3. And what I want you to do is, it's much easier to do it on a desk, but I'm going to show you how to do it holding it up in the air. You just roll it long ways so that it's the sort of longest tall shape you can make. Like this. So has anyone got a piece of paper? Yeah, great. And then once it's rolled into this sort of tall, thin tube, just stick a piece of sellotape or a rubber band around the middle to just keep it tight in a tube like that. So this is what we're aiming for. We're just aiming for a tall thing that you can balance on your hand like this. Okay. So, brilliant. All right, so the first thing I want you to do, which is a bit of a strange instruction, is I want you to put this tube on your hand and then close your eyes and see if you can keep it upright. Obviously, if you're balancing on your hand, you shouldn't be able to do that. So basically what I want that to happen is that it just falls, right? Because there's no feedback. And what we have got here is a reinforcing feedback loop. So as the paper starts to tilt, you get a stronger force pulling it down. That makes it tilt even more, and that creates an even stronger force of gravity pulling it down. So you get this accelerating change away, destabilizing force that takes it over to an extreme, right? And that's kind of like a reinforcing feedback loop that we see in all systems. So for example, the rich get richer. Stress creates poor sleep, and that creates poor performance, and that then leads to more stress, which then leads to poor sleep again. So you get this reinforcing loop. You get the echo chamber effect, where social media platforms the algorithm feeds you things that you've already liked looking at before. And so you get further and further into an extreme little sort of bubble of information that's different to other people's bubbles. And we also see like a vicious cycle of poverty, where, for example, if you're already haven't got the means to support yourself, you're less likely to be able to get the education and a good healthy diet, and therefore less likely to be able to get a job or hold down a job, and therefore get even poorer. So you get this sort of cycle downwards. Okay, so now we're going to try and, what do we want to do? If we've got a system that's just going to this an extreme, we want to add in a bit of balancing feedback, right? To try and keep the system balanced. So for example, in the stress, so let's, what I want you to do is look at the bottom. You're only allowed to look at the bottom of the newspaper. And I want you to now see if you can balance it on your hand. But you're only allowed to look at the bottom. So what I'm finding is that I'm getting a bit of balancing, but actually it's still going to an extreme. So we've added in some balancing feedback. So for example, it could be sleep hygiene workshops to deal with stress, but those in themselves are not strong enough to counteract the reinforcing feedback loop. So the overall system is still going to an extreme, even though it might have slowed down a little bit. So now I want you to look at the top of the piece of paper and try this again. So I want you to look at the top of the newspaper and see if you can balance it on your hand. And so what I'm seeing is quite a few people managing to balance their paper. Yeah. So we've now created a dynamic but balanced system. And what we've done is we've added in enough enough balancing feedback for example, we might have added in flexible working hours and conflict resolution mechanisms in your organization. And those three things together have now overridden the stress, poor sleep, reduced performance reinforcing feedback loop. And we've created an overall balancing feedback, and we've taken this system into a more balanced state. So those are the two types of feedback. We've got balancing with things like shivering, sweating, conflict resolution, and regular communication about what's going on. We've got reinforcing, some of them unhelpful, like things like staff shortages leading to overwork, leading to burned out staff leaving, meaning even more staff shortages. You might have low trust leading to micromanagement, leading to disengaged staff and performance drops, and therefore even more low trust and even more micromanagement. And again, you might have stress leading to health issues, leading to reduced ability to cope, causing even more stress. So if we're understanding how these feedback loops work in organizations, it can really help to catch them and see if we can either balance them or reverse the reinforcing loop, so it goes in a positive direction than a negative direction. Because these reinforcing loops, as well as causing problems, can actually be really powerful and helpful. Say, for example, more people involved in an initiative encourages other people to get involved, which encourages even more people to get involved. If you're trying to increase sustainable transport, more bikes on the street encourages more bikes, or healthy active lifestyle creates the sort of feeling of wanting an energy to then continue doing more exercise or eating more healthily. And celebration at the end of something creates better performance next time, which then gives you even more to celebrate the next time. And things like nonviolent communication or skillful communication can help flip cycles of kind of increasing tension or unpleasantness between staff and flip it into increasing kindness or increasing well-being in the workplace. And so basically most dynamics that we see happening in the world in these complex systems are basically made up of these reinforcing and balancing feedbacks. And so I think it can just be such a valuable way to understand what's going on and catch things. But it also can be a real source of innovation and, like I said before, of novelty in the face of uncertainty. So this is a really simple thing you can actually do yourself if you want to. This is basically like linking your phone to your phone camera to your computer screen and then just shining your phone camera towards the computer screen. So I'm basically creating a feedback loop, a reinforcing feedback loop. And what's amazing is that even though this is just, such a sort of simple, just technical thing, as we carry on, you'll see these incredible shapes and colors that are emerging just through that reinforcing feedback process. And this really reminds me of, I teach improvisation skills as a way of helping people deal with uncertainty. And one of the key kind of ideas and games in impro is to say yes and, right? I'm sure most of you have heard of that idea, that you take somebody's idea, you say yes, and then you build on it. So rather than saying yeah, but, and then criticizing it, you say yes and then you add to it. And then when your partner does the same, you create this reinforcing feedback loop, and then you can kind of just really have this almost emergent creativity that comes from the space between you, from the relationship. And this is kind of reminds me of what's going on with this reinforcing feedback on the screen, where you're getting these mad images and colors coming just from the fact that it's just taking what the last thing happened and putting it back through again. So we're very close to the end of the time, so I'm going to just finish by saying that so I hope this has been helpful, this idea of organizations as a living system. I think it's Frederick Laloux talks about this in his book and talks about 3 breakthroughs that come when we see organizations as a living system. And one of them, this self-management, is kind of what we've been talking about in terms of the distributed intelligence in the ant colony and the feedback loops. But then he sort of moves into what he calls wholeness and people bringing their whole self to work and not being this kind of mask of professionalism. And this is where I think it kind of moves perhaps more into the realm of what Alef Trust is doing and the transpersonal psychology work. And what I've noticed is that people who start off teaching around systems thinking, after a while, they start to move into kind of deeper levels of personal change and kind of even this idea of what he calls evolutionary purpose. So he's talking about the organization itself having a life and a sense of direction, and that our role as staff members or managers is to kind of listen to that purpose and almost like create space for the emergence. And it's similar where Peter Senge and Otto Sharma and Betty Sue Flowers in Presence are talking about very similar things, where it's really much more about genuinely letting go of that idea of control and creating a space, again, like we're talking about, for emergence and almost listening to the future that wants to emerge. So he's quoting Otto Sharma, the ability to shift from reacting against the past to leaning into and presencing an emerging future is probably the single most important leadership capacity today. And he also says, this is the moment when what we need most is enough people with skill, heart, and wisdom to help pull ourselves back from the edge of breakdown and onto a different path. And so, yeah, so I hope that some of those ideas have been helpful for you. And we literally have 2 minutes if anyone has any final thoughts or comments that they want to say. Just either say something in the chat or just unmute yourself.
Robin, whilst anybody else who wishes to ask a question or make a comment at this stage is welcome to do so. Before we reach full time, I'll take the opportunity to thank you for the wealth of knowledge and compelling experience that you've brought to us today. It's been fun. Some really vivid, embodied experiences to remind us of complexity. And your take home at the end, referencing Sharma, is especially compelling and aligns beautifully with our work at Alef Trust as well. Ajahn Sharma is in fact a popular name in our circles, and it is very reassuring to recognize that this transpersonal perspective enables us to perhaps embrace uncertainty and understand complexity through broader lenses, enabling us to perhaps have less of a knee-jerk reaction as we move into an ever more complex world, and thereby find ways to navigate. And once again, the relational component, being able to relate to each other, mindfulness, openness, acceptance, compassion, these are words you've used today, which are very much in alignment with our transpersonal perspective. So as the world becomes more complex, perhaps the transpersonal perspective affords us ways to navigate through these times. There are a few items in the chat window now. There's thanks to you, so appreciation being showed. We are reaching full time. Does anybody want to unmute and have one question or statement? Barbara, I can see your hand.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, first of all, that was absolutely brilliant. I loved it, Robin. Interestingly, I was just helping my son prepare for a presentation he's making about transnational participatory innovations for a master's thing that he's doing, so it was very relevant. But I'm just wondering, how do you feel like, you know, do you feel optimistic? Do you feel pessimistic? And, you know, what is in your mind to do right now, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I must say I feel a balanced sort of mixture, obviously. But I must say it does help, you know, with stuff that's going on right now. So, for example, what Trump's doing and this kind of sudden shift in the narrative around net zero that Reform UK and the Conservatives have suddenly sort of broken with this cross-party agreement about doing action on climate change is, you know, both a sort of dagger in the heart, having been working on this for 30 years, but also it's sort of, luckily, having this kind of idea about going through the chaos, it kind of also makes me think, well, maybe we need to go through a process that creates enough disruption in the kind of the systems that we've been part of and that haven't actually very successfully been taking climate action. And maybe we needed to sort of shake it up enough that we can really have transformative change, because that, unfortunately, that's really what we need in the next few years. We do need transformative change if we want human civilization to survive. Basically, it's as stark as that. So, and interestingly, one of the things I'm currently really passionate about is talking to Reform voters and Reform MPs and having that conversation, because I think that one of the problems and one of the reasons we've had this sudden shift is because there isn't communication and there's this kind of othering that goes on. So there's all of these people who maybe think like me and agree with what we're talking about here, but have been basically saying, look, if you think like that and you vote for Trump and Reform, you are basically just evil, racist, transphobic, whatever it is, just kind of labels that kind of other and create this sense that they're bad people. And I think actually we need to listen to those people, and we need to respond to what they're saying and say, we don't agree with that solution. We don't agree with what Trump is proposing, or maybe Farage is proposing, but we do hear that you're having trouble with some of these changes that are happening in society, and what is it that we can do? And actually, you know, there's interesting, you know, kind of overlaps with, for example, localization. That idea of localization is a kind of, you know, form that I would propose, whereas in Trump's view, it's protectionism and kind of creating barriers and tariffs. But they're actually kind of dealing with a similar issue, just in a slightly different, with a slightly different narrative to them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I personally feel optimistic. I think one of the biggest things to overcome is the biases, and, you know, like people not coming together to, like, you know, I actually, sorry, I used to work in the oil business, and, you know, it's very complex, whether it's carbon or this or that. But just to get people to come together instead of saying, no, I'm right, you're wrong, and like people to act in a kind of sensible way. That's what frustrates me, that we have this like division, and like you're saying, pointing the fingers to this one and that one, and then I all think we can all do something, like stop buying things that are wrapped in plastic, stop going to supermarkets, stop you know, buying things that are not organic, and, you know, so many things we can all do to make a difference, and not wait till, you know, the organizations fix it for us.
Yeah, and at the community level as well, I'm involved with Transition Town Totnes, and one of the things I love about Transition Towns is that idea that you don't have to just do good, sustainable stuff by yourself. You can do it as a community. And one of the benefits of that is, as well as creating a more sustainable world, you're also creating community, and actually, and it's actually really fulfilling and meaningful. And I mean, that's the other thing. I sometimes, one of the things that Peter Senge is talking about is having vision, you know, having a sense of doing something that you do because you care about it, and that's actually just a key thing in a human life, you know, having meaningful contribution. And what could be more meaningful than saving the world and creating a high well-being society? And it's sort of, to me, it's just, what a weird missed opportunity for most businesses to not be taking that up as their vision. I just think, what a perfect, and politicians, it's a brilliant, perfect narrative. It's like you get to be the person who saves the world and makes everyone's lives better. But for some reason, that person has not really managed, that person isn't around who's
here we are. Community.
Yes, exactly.
That was really brilliant. I loved it. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Robin, for showing us how we get to be that person. We can see your contact details on the screen. Thank you. So we know how to reach you. It's been rich, inspiring, and stimulating on many levels. Thank you for sharing your experience with us today. I'm popping into the chat window a little push for our next hub session. It's only in September, on 16th of September at 7:30 p.m., Reconnecting Body, Nature and Purpose in the Workplace with Dr. Valentina Canessa Pollard. So enjoy your summer break, everybody. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you once again to Robin. And
hi, Jeff. Really nice to see everyone. Thanks for all your comments.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Robin.
Pleasure. Enjoy Italy.
Thank you.